Good. Well, thank you very much, Saul. Thanks for inviting me. 10 years on from that conference, the first CTC conference in Dublin, and we're sort of, what have we learned? I suppose what's immediately struck me looking at Andre is that we've learned that Andre doesn't age, and that if you're a middle-aged dreadlocks, you get increasingly sad looking. So we've learned that. I suppose the basis of the whole CMAM model, I don't think it was Andre and Nutriset's invention of plumping up, although that was an essential part of it. I don't think it was the treating at home. I think the key change was a shift from a supply-driven mentality to a demand-driven mentality. Start to devise programs that are focused on demand, you start to have to look at essentially four things. You have to look at, are people aware of the program? Do they understand it? You have to look at, have they got access to the program? You have to look, are the resources that are required available to them? And then you have to actually start assessing impact at a population level. So this shift actually is an incredibly profound shift in the way we deliver nutritional programs. I'll start with number 4 first, the monitoring of impact and actual sort of assessing impact. And that's why I think it's not unsurprising that the coverage monitoring network has facilitated this forum. When you've shifted from a clinical model where we were supplying and giving resources, giving a cure to passive beneficiaries, to a public health model, the determinants of impact stop being what numbers are cured, but it actually start to be what proportion of the people who require treatment or a cure do you get in your programs. And the very early work we did in the whole CTC development with Mark and Valid was to develop these direct estimates of coverage. And so a key challenge at the moment is what percentage of programs are directly estimating coverage? Why it's so important is that if you're indirectly estimating coverage, which is what used to happen in clinical programs, you have an estimate of actual impact, i.e. the proportion of children in your program, that is totally inaccurate and woefully insufficient. An indirect measure, i.e. you look at how many people, you have a prevalence survey, says, oh, okay, you have 100,000 people in this population, we've got a prevalence of, call it 2%, but there's confidence limits around that prevalence of 1 to 2%. And therefore, if we've got 1,000 people in that program, with a prevalence of 1 to 2%, so we've either got 100% coverage or we've got 30% coverage. Meaningless, absolutely meaningless. The other thing with the indirect, you're using prevalence. And even you look at the Lancet series, they confuse prevalence with incidence. I can be given a lecture to 1,000 people who are, say, fat, middle-aged smokers who I can look at what's the point prevalence of cardiac arrest or coronary, heart attacks in this room, and it's 0. What's the incidence in that room of 1,000 fat, middle-aged smokers? It could be 10, 20, 30. And so prevalence and incidence with an acute condition are very, very different. An acute malnutrition, if you're using prevalence as to look at your target population, it's going to throw you out completely. And this is a lesson that Lancet didn't learn in that last series. So the first thing I think we knew then and we've still got to enforce, and I'm so pleased the CMAM network is pushing this forward, is that we have to look at direct estimates of coverage. And if you're doing a CMAM program and you're not looking at direct estimates of coverage, I don't believe you are doing a CMAM program. The second is awareness. It wasn't by chance it was called community-based. There's again this difference from supply to demand. This is a program that to work best has to be based in understanding and awareness in the community, and it has to be built up from that. The problem is, as we're scaling up, we're seeing much more supply drive, we're seeing much more assessing programs of how many tons of plumpy nut have been delivered. That will just cause a problem, because unless you've got the capacity to absorb that treatment at the community level, it will get diverted and it will just undermine confidence in the treatment, and once you lose the vibe, those programs have small impact. And it's not by chance that when you look at the coverage results, the programs that have low coverage, the main reason is because people are not aware of the program, or they don't understand what that program means to them. And that, in a community-based program, the foundation must be on understanding and creating demand for that service. The third thing, access. The shift from the hospital-based model, where you had very few centres that highly resourced, that people had to travel miles to a community-based program, was to get the program closer to people and to reduce their costs of attending that program. Now, one of the problems we still face, and I think still needs research, is at the moment the majority of CMAM programs work out of health facilities. So they're not truly facility-based, and in a lot of areas there's a large distance that people have to travel to health facilities. That means that they have huge opportunity costs. They wait until they're desperate to come, particularly if there's a failure of awareness building and understanding. And we know that the key determinant of successful treatment is how early people get to you. If you get people early, they recover better. And so this model we've got at the moment, it needs of evolution. To make it truly community-based, we've got to address this issue of how we move away from the clinic and actually deliver services in the community to empower communities to do it. I think that is a challenge that is going to take a lot of research. It's going to take changes to protocols, and it's going to take courage. The first article we ever wrote about CTC highlighted the fact that when you have a public health approach, if you're getting high coverage, you're going to get people in that program who are difficult to treat. And if you focus on how do you refer them and how do you focus on them rather than getting those people in, you start to focus down into a clinical mindset, into a concentrating resource mindset. You're going to have to accept that some people in these programs are going to do badly. And for sure, you can try and put referral in, but if you let that undermine your efforts to get into the community and get the barriers to accessing programs as low as possible, you're going to have a self-fulfilling problem in that you focus on the severe cases so you don't get people early, therefore you have more severe cases. And I think we haven't cracked that problem yet. The last key issue, and I'm doing right, 2 minutes to go, so we're all right, is availability of resource. If you look at the early CTC idea, it was to have the manufacture of ready-to-use food in countries where it was required, made out of local available crops, so that you had a strengthening of resilience and improvement of smallholder farmer agriculture at the same time as you had treatment of undernutrition. In practice, I mean, UNICEF has made some efforts to try and diversify the supplier base, but in practice, I think their statistics do not tell the truth. They're saying there are now 20 different suppliers from a multitude of countries, but when you look at it, actually 11 of those suppliers are still from one corporate network with their franchise unit and the single brand. Another 6 of those suppliers don't have actual access to the market because of patent restrictions. In Africa, there are only about 3 independent producers. And the key problem we face is that the market is non-transparent. You have an unhealthy market where you have a dominant supplier and you have a dominant customer who is also the certifier. This is non-transparent, and it holds itself up to problems because you don't know what's going on. It's controlled by very few people. In any other market, you would want real, true competition. And to get this in the ready-to-use food market, we have to have independent certification. You cannot have the main customer saying, oh, we certify for our own needs. And if we haven't got a strategic need in this country, we're not going to bother to certify, or creating their own standards. You have, for example, the WHO has a normative standard of 10 parts per billion for aflatoxin, and they're the normative health agency. In their CMAM joint statement, they have 10 parts per billion, but for some reason UNICEF have put 5 parts per billion, which is a huge barrier to local production. And it means that small local producers cannot raise the capital to break into this market. And we know that to have... look. I'll do a sum up in 30 seconds. We know that to have effective competition, you have to have an open and transparent market, and that needs changing. So, I think in summary, I've got to make sure I got my summary points. We've come a long way. 3 million children treated last year, that's great. But there's over 20 million children with SAM, so we've got a huge way to come. With the scale-up comes threats, and the way to address those threats is through real continuous coverage assessment. If any one of those access, availability, or quality of care breaks, coverage goes down. And so coverage is the best proxy we have for impact, and I know Mark is working hard, Valid, ACF are working hard to develop new techniques to continually monitor impact. We have to resist the temptation just to look at process indicators and to focus on clinics. We have to get out of the clinic further in the community, and we need a transparent, competitive market in ready-to-use foods with independent certification. Thank you.